No, it was that article and Gillian Tett's analogy about the sausage factory that helped me understand what was going on. That was quite interesting.
That was
Was it?
mine.
I thought you stole it. I
That
thought you
was
stole it from
mine.
her.
No, I did not. I thought of
Oh,
that all
okay.
by
Then it was
myself.
Merryn's sausage
And
factory.
I used it on the Today program to explain it to the. I can't believe it. All these years you've been attributing that to
Oh, I
Gillian.
didn't. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the MoneyWeek Talk series. I'm Andrew van Sickle, Editor-in-Chief of MoneyWeek, and today is a very special occasion. It's the magazine's 25th birthday next month. The first edition appeared on the 3rd of November 2000, and to celebrate the birthday, I've invited my three predecessors to join me. We're going to look back at how MoneyWeek got going, what it was like to edit it, why it proved so fabulously successful, and how it might evolve in a fast-changing media landscape. My three predecessors are Merryn Somerset Webb, the founding editor and now editor-at-large at Bloomberg, John Stepek, who took over from Merryn at the magazine. He's senior reporter at Bloomberg, and he's just won another award, this time from the Association of Investment Companies, which has named him Best Online Commentator. And we have Cris Heaton, who's been with us since the mid-zeros, and he edited between 2016 and 2018, shortly before I did, and he's currently contributing editor. Right, why don't we start at the beginning of the story? Merryn, would you tell us how you got involved with MoneyWeek, and a quick summary perhaps of what you've been doing before that for listeners who don't know?
I had been working in Japan. I was a Japanese equity broker, and I had been working in Japan for Warburgs, which then merged with SBC and then merged with UBS. So I've been sitting on at a desk in Tokyo through all three of those mergers. I had a lot of fun. And then I decided to come home. I'd been in Japan for some time. I came back to the UK, and I thought that I would continue to be a broker. But the Japanese market, of course, is in a different time zone to the UK market, and broking into a dead market is no fun at all. And I didn't really want to do a different market, so I started looking around to think, well, what else might I do? So I started that process that I think a lot of people go through when they think that they might change the direction of their career, of asking everybody else what they did. So I was looking into what everyone else did, and then I was at a drinks party one night and asked a nice woman who I was introduced to what she did. And she turned out to be Jemima Lewis, who was the deputy editor of The Week at the time. And I said to her, gosh, that's interesting. We had a nice chat. And she found out that I had worked in the city and knew something about money. And she said, would you drop your CV off and come in and do some writing for us, maybe, because we don't have a city editor. So I went in the next day and I did exactly that. And I started writing city pages for them. I'm totally unaware, by the way, and this is something that I only found out later, much later, possibly too much later, which is that not very many people can write. And it turned out that they had been through quite a lot of people before me. I think I was number 30 or something, who come through the doors and be sat down in front of a thing and been told to précis this. And it turns out to be a relatively rare skill. But I wish they'd told me that at the time, and hiring you lot would have been a lot easier, because when I started hiring for MoneyWeek, I was only looking for people who, were kind of nice and looked clever. I figured everyone could write. Anyway, so I was doing that at the Week. That was kind of fun, but abysmally paid. So then the Japanese market took one of its periodic turn-ups. Everyone was looking for Japanese brokers, and I got a call from a headhunter, and so I went to Paribas and to work as a Japanese broker, but from London. And that lasted about 5 minutes before they merged with BNP. During this period, I had kept in touch with John Connell, who was one of the founders of The Week and the editor-in-chief at the time. Jeremy Grady was editor at the time. So John and I had started to talk about the idea of doing a version of The Week that was devoted entirely to money, on the basis that we were in the run-up at this point to the blow-off of the dot-com bubble. And so there was a huge amount of financial information out there. Every single newspaper was churning out PR nonsense. Well, there was information everywhere, and most of it was rubbish. And I was beginning to get that sense that I hadn't necessarily had when I was working on the institutional side of finance. So the institutional side of finance was not actually on the side of the retail investor, but the retail investor's enemy. And it began to dawn on me during this period that the entire time that I was working as a broker, on the institutional side, no one had ever mentioned the end beneficial owner of any of the assets with which we dealt. There was no sense. And I don't think if you'd asked me when I was 25 why I was doing what I was doing, I would have had the faintest idea that my career and everything around me was supposed to be there to help ordinary people have a better future. That was never mentioned and never discussed. So this was a gradual dawning for me during this period. I was always having lunch with John Connell often. And to John's credit, he went out, he raised the money, he arranged everything with Dennis, who were the owners and backers of the week at the time. And off we went. I resigned from Parabellum.
And what was your first thought when this was all having to happen? I've got to draw on absolutely every favor, every resource I possibly can, like school friends, even if you didn't know them particularly well, absolutely everyone. Was that much harder than you thought, like rounding up people?
No. I mean, that wasn't necessarily the difficult bit. The difficult bit was that John knew absolutely nothing at all about money. Nothing. And I knew absolutely nothing about magazines, publishing, laying stuff out, photographs, managing people, hiring people, nothing. All I knew about was money, and John didn't know anything about that. So, I mean, it was literally the blind leading the blind. And worse, going back to what I said earlier, I was firmly under the impression that everyone intelligent who had a reasonable degree and a GCSE in English could write. Which, by the way, is nonsense. Nonsense. Almost no one can write. It's an incredibly rare and precious skill.
You've all said at one point that the Venn diagram intersection between people who are clued up in finance, people who can actually write, particularly précis, and people who will accept a less than fabulous salary is minuscule. In fact, it might just cover this podcast for a while, you know?
They do have to be weirdos, basically. I mean, not and weirdos in the best sense. They have to be people who have often rejected or somehow not ended up in finance and are in some way. And I would say some of the best writers we had were ever so slightly. Well, that thing that Merryn was talking about, the idea that the city actually is not the retail investor's friend, and they've kind of decided to take the side of the retail investor. I mean, Phil Oakley was probably one of the best examples of that, I would say, but it's definitely been others as well.
But I would say that over the time that we have been doing this, and I would like to think that MoneyWeek played a part in raising the standard of particularly personal finance journalism across the board. I do think that one thing that if we started MoneyWeek again today, I do think that the hiring would be easier, because I think that there's a much better awareness of personal finance, of personal investing, and there's a much higher quality of people working in our business. So that is a big positive. And the other startup bits, I mean, we were very lucky in that first year because Dennis took us on. So we shared the week offices, we shared the week resources in terms of printers, that kind of thing. And we were fairly well financed for that year. So, I mean, I had 2 assistants. Those were the days.
Yes, that's right. We had 2 assistants. We actually had all the German newspapers delivered, which meant that at 4 o'clock on Wednesday, I could panic-strickenly find best columns because everyone had forgotten to do the best columns.
Absolutely. You were such a great hire, Andrew. Absolutely amazing. And one of those assistants has gone on to be a really, almost good, well, possibly quite famous at this point, artist. So, and that was all good. Serena Rowe. Go buy some of her paintings. They're really very beautiful. So that bit was okay. Laying out the magazine, designing the magazine. John's very good at that stuff. We had a really great designer in the beginning, Dave. Remember Dave? Dave was great. And we had a good picture editor, Natasha, which was very inexperienced at the time. Now, of course, she's normally experienced. So we got that production team together quite well. Getting the writers together was harder because of this can you write, do you understand money, and also the précis problem. So that bit was all fine. I mean, the problem, of course, is, as you will remember, Andrew, was that no one bought it. Literally no one. And so, we spent quite a lot of money on really, really quite bad ads on the tube and all sorts of things. And then we sat back thinking, well, we're writing this marvelous stuff. Check us out pricing this stuff. Isn't it marvelous? People will buy it. Because they didn't buy it. And they didn't buy it because it's very hard to get to people in the first place, but also because Well, I'll tell you why I think. I'm very interested to know what you think about the change. But for me, it was that initially we very much felt that MoneyWeek was to be an actual version of the week, an imitation of the week, to be a digest. We were doing that with MoneyWeek. This guy says you should buy gold. This guy says you should sell gold, and that's what we were trying to do, trying to tell people who didn't have a background in finance what they should do with their money, but we weren't telling them. So the big change came when we pulled back from that and said, actually, I do know something about this. I do have opinions on this stuff, and I'm actually going to tell you what the correct answer is. And when we did that, and we developed between all of us, a sort of macroeconomic wrapper inside which to place the financial information we were giving, and we were then able to start saying, do you know what? Actually, the world is going to hell in a handbasket, and you should sell those .com stocks, and you should buy that gold. That's when we got traction. That I'm being right, of course.
Yes. No, well, that's and Bill Bonner's money, right? Because everyone has to reach critical mass at some point, and Bill Bonner's not only his contrarian views were helpful for our framework, because the mainstream is so tediously Keynesian and soft left, but his marketing campaigns were pretty good, and that did help us.
Yeah, we mustn't forget about Angus MacDonald. We mustn't skip straight to Bill Bonner, because without Angus, we wouldn't have made it either.
Well, Andrew, at this point, Andrew, you should probably explain how you ended up being involved in MoneyWeek and how you got caught up in this madness, because you and Merryn were there right at the beginning. And without hearing your history and what you walked into here, the picture.
Yes, well, it was fairly straightforward. I had no idea what to do after university, and I rather quickly ran out of money. So I went to Harrods and started selling knitwear to the Russian mafia. And then I discovered The Week, and I approached John Connell, somehow brilliantly managing to assume that he was a woman, because Jolyon and Evelyn are always thought of female names, although they can be both. And I wrote to him saying, hi, I think I can help you. And he said, well, if you think that, I don't do interviews, so why don't you just send something to Jeremy? So I did, and he used it. So I then did another 10 of these. And after 10 of those, Jeremy said, oh, well, look.
Sorry, and I have to interrupt. What did you send? Did you send Crises? I sent best column
I did stuff for the best European articles page. So I did some bigger pieces, weaving them together, and I did some straightforward Crises. And there was a lot going on in Central Europe at the time. And so he often used it. And then he said, look, we'd like to start a financial version. I said, well, I don't really know anything about finance. And he said, don't worry, Merryn will explain the finance. You just need to Crises stuff. And that's broadly how I came on board. And then I think that worked quite well in the sense that Merryn did kindly explain the finance. And the Crises gradually increased, and gradually I got more confident in my own opinions. And then that clicked in quite well with how in about 03, 04, we started to develop our own voice. So that was broadly it. The other recollection I have is an interesting lesson, possibly on startups, is that for all that it's incredibly exciting to start a business, it's not necessarily the happiest time. I remember, Merryn, you yelling at John and John yelling at you. And this is probably totally par for the course for any startup. But, it was very interesting, because I remember thinking, gosh, for all that this is really unbelievably exciting, what if I don't have a job next week? You know what I mean? So any startup will be fraught and fascinating, but perhaps not the happiest time of your life. And I always remember thinking also, something you said, Merryn, years later in an interview, it was actually a good thing to start in 2000, because it looked like there might be a recession, but we probably got that building cheaper. We probably got some people cheaper. We probably got some equipment cheaper. And that was actually no bad thing at all. So those were my takeaways from the beginning, really.
But Andrew, do you remember how hard we worked? I mean, I was in that office. My boyfriend at the time, he would drop me at the office at like 6 o'clock in the morning, and I wouldn't leave until 8, 9, 10. And we didn't stop working. We would nip out for 10 minutes at lunchtime, and then we were just writing and writing and reading and reading and writing and calling, and we worked so
No, we did.
hard.
We should get some sort of prize in retrospect for doing that. Practically city hours, but not city money. So that was tricky.
There were so many kind of desperate days. And I remember I used to say to everybody that I expected everybody to do 1 page.
Yeah, and broadly we did, I think.
But I expected myself to do 3 or 4 pages plus the editor's letter plus all the editing. How many pages did you do a day, John?
I can't remember, but I do remember spending a lot of time trying to work out what our page per person rate was, and how we were getting on, and where the blockages were. I mean, I do think one of the main features of my time at the magazine was trying to move it from being quite as skin of the teeth, getting there every week. Because one thing we did do was we pulled the production deadline forward, because basically the printer said to us, you need to get all the pages here by a certain time, or we're going to start charging you more because we've got other clients. And at first when that happened, we were all, including me, because this wasn't coming down from me, like, how are we going to do that? But then we had to basically sit down and work out a much more kind of rigorous kind of schedule, and the constant fight to try and drag stuff back, because the natural human tendency is always to leave stuff till you don't think you're leaving it till the last minute, but you actually kind of are, because you want everything to be as fresh as possible, and that's really important with a weekly. But it's like when you talk to people who work on monthlies, the journalists, if they're being honest with you, they will explain, well, basically we take 2 weeks off every month, and then they just hammer everything together in the last fortnight. And it wasn't like that for us, but there were like a lot of kind of 12 to 16-hour days on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, followed up by everyone being exhausted and wiped out on Thursday. And I think the one thing that kind of changed purely out of necessity over my time, because we were always under-resourced. And one thing I realise now is that the constant beating myself up about not ever quite having enough slack was purely about never having enough people, enough kind of financial support. It was always running just close to the wire as you could possibly get. I think a highly productive private sector company.
But I mean, I was a terrible delegator, and you were much better when you took over. You were much better at spreading the load around and giving other people responsibilities. And
I remember thinking John was definitely a good delegator. Actually, since we're up to 05.
Oh, God, that is so kind of you, because I just could not. I thought I was an awful delegator. I mean, you know.
I didn't think you were a good delegator. I said
Thank you. That's good.
Well, we're jumping ahead a bit here, because Merryn and Andrew, you've got to kind of like 2000.
No, yeah, I thought actually we're pretty much up to we're pretty much up to 05, and actually now it's John's turn to just explain how we got here, and then continued to delegate well.
Hang on, but we still haven't done.
Oh no, okay. Will you tell Angus, because I never really knew the Angus thing.
Well, he was just there, wasn't he? Still know Angus. Angus is often Angus is an MP now. Anyway, Angus, when Dennis had enough of us, which was entirely fair, Angus MacDonald bought the magazine, or bought their share of the magazine, and we moved into his offices. He had financial news at the time, so we moved in there for, actually, I can't even remember how long.
About a year and a half.
Oh, was it that long? I was going to say about 8 months. And we didn't really get anywhere there because, they were very absorbed in financial news and it was not a good fit. So we were really in a pile of trouble. We really were. We still had basically no readers. We were working ourselves to the bone producing a magazine that not that many people were reading. We were beginning to get our own voice, but there was no marketing of any kind. So there was no one to read the voice. And then Bill Bonner turned up, who owned this big publishing company in the US, or newsletter publishing company in the US, Agora. And he picked up MoneyWeek. He knew he and John connected somehow. The details escape me. And that's how we ended up with Bill. But now I'm handing over to John.
I want to say, though I'm not absolutely sure of this, that he picked up a copy of MoneyWeek on the Eurostar, didn't he? Or something like that, and liked it so much that he decided to buy the company.
Yeah.
I
think that is how the story picked it up, and it was lucky that he picked up an issue in which I had a gold buggy style rant in the editor's letter,
and we might have quoted him in market at that point.
The ultimate gold bug, and that was a point of connection.
Definitely. For us. And then John came in 2005.
I bet you wish you'd listened, huh? I hope you all listened. You all should be so.
I remember
rich.
Merryn so excited when gold passed 300 and we were in that grotty office of Angus's in this attic, and you were running around like a headless chicken in the best possible way, going, oh my God.
You should see me these days, Andrew.
Gold's gone past 3,000. Who knew? You could add a zero, huh?
Yeah.
Well, the true benchmark of MoneyWeek and gold is actually, Andrew's. Is it a sovereign or a Krugerrand that you have that you were given?
This is one of the few things that I own that was a very good investment longer term. It's purely coincidental. In 1981, at the top of the gold market, my dad got me a little Krugerrand. And I see the other day that we have finally made it to a new inflation-adjusted high in gold, because gold is, of course, a great inflation hedge, but only very long term, and one shouldn't rush these things. And I remember thinking, gosh, this Krugerrand is now actually in the, in plus in real terms. He was always good at timing, my dad. So 1981 is, of course, perfect for buying a Krugerrand. But yeah, so you're right. We had the gold, we had the more contrarian marketsy stuff, and then we moved to Sea Container's house with Bill Bonner's mob, and then John, you arrived from Teletext, no?
Yeah, no, I came over from Teletext, so I've been working on. To cut a very long story short, I graduated in the mid-90s, and I wanted to be a writer, preferably a writer of fiction. And then after a prolonged period of time working in various places, I actually am listed in the credits as the writer of two obscure folk tales made by Welsh Channel 4. But that's a story for another day.
Everyone frantically Googling.
Yeah, I retrained as a journalist in 2002. And I was always sort of quite interested in finance and business, but no real background there except for coming from a family business background. So I kind of knew roughly what businesses and the hassles involved were like. But in terms of the actual, accounting and certainly markets, I was basically a novice. So I left and I ended up getting a job on Teletext's finance desk. I'm sure most of the listeners are old enough to remember what Teletext was. It was basically prehistoric internet. And so you'd get up in the morning, and we were kind of like a newswire. So as soon as the RNSs hit the wires, like the company releases at 7 in the morning, we'd have to kind of read them and get a story up by 8 a.m. And that was, we're talking about 65 words per page. And maybe if you were lucky, you could get to 3 pages on the Teletext website, because people had to just sit there and wait for it to change. They couldn't, once you got to the bottom, kind of flick to the next page. So getting practice at reading, say, BP's quarterly results at speed, picking the story out of it, and then turning it into 180 words was really, really good. It was just superb training for a kind of beginner finance journalist. And even better, they had the personal finance side as well, where you could stretch to 6 pages. So, a grand total of 300 words to explain a juniorizer and phone up a load of people and say, oh, what should I put in my juniorizer? So that was excellent training. But then, of course, the internet slaughtered Teletext, because Teletext is where people used to get their cheap holidays. And then internet came along, and that part of I think it accounted for something like 80% of the company's revenue. And so that was in the bin. And so I stupidly jumped before we were all made redundant. I say stupidly because obviously they got redundancy payoff, so I missed out on that. And I sort of found the MoneyWeek was advertising for a web editor, which would also involve writing the newsletter, Money Morning. And I remember going into the interview, not knowing anything really about MoneyWeek. The recruitment agent sent me a couple of copies and I read it. I thought, this is interesting, but very quirky. It was a very weird looking magazine at that point, and that was part of its appeal. So I walked in, and the kind of publisher at the time, Toby Bray, sort of said hello. And it was kind of grotty premises. Like Sea Container's house is a very flash hotel now. But at the time, it was like a kind of abandoned warehouse with brown carpets everywhere. And I remember thinking, okay, it was kind of skanky. I remember when I went in. And the thing is, I was thinking, is this right? And then Merryn was there waiting in the interview room. And I was like, wait a minute, I know her. She writes for the Sunday Times and she's really clever and really good. And I thought, okay, it can't be a complete Muppet show. And that really is the thing that sort of like made me adjust my expectations. And then thankfully somehow, because I guess even although I was not, I've got obviously a very kind of, I've had a lot of time working in markets now. At the time, I didn't have much knowledge, but I did somehow have lots of opinions. So I did not mind just mouthing off about stuff in the interview and kind of crossing my fingers and hoping that I was basically right and not saying anything stupid. And as a result, I kind of got the job after I did a few trial shifts.
John doesn't know, as we didn't understand anything he said.
That too. I mean, Bill Bonner, really nice guy, but Bill never understood anything I said at any point. Even once I'd been down here long enough to get the slightly leavened Glaswegian accent that you hopefully can all understand now.
After 15 years, when you left a room, he was still saying to me, "What did he say?"
Yeah, which is kind of, I think he spoke French and Spanish and multiple other languages as well. Just didn't speak Ouija. But no, so it was, but anyway, so, and then I guess, I was there for a few years. The other great thing was doing Money Morning. So I had to do Money Morning on a daily basis. And that again was kind of like a kind of baptism of fire, but you had to find something interesting to write about every day.
Like every day, really, isn't it?
Yeah, and just come up with a kind of punchy viewpoint on it. But also there's far less competition then. That idea of writing in an irreverent way, in a contrarian way about financial markets was something that I really think Bill pioneered. And I kind of took his example, so I'm just trying to get the light going in here again. So the Daily Reckoning, I kind of took a lot of the tone from that. That was kind of Bill's daily newsletter. And also I got an awful lot of really great feedback from Toby and Merryn on where I was going wrong and where I was pushing it too far and where it should be kind of pulled in. And so it was great. So, I mean, from that point of view, all of that just made me a much better writer. And then eventually, I honestly can't remember the exact dates, but Merryn, you went on maternity leave and we had to get a new editor or somebody stand in. So at that point, I ended up going up to deputy editor and sort of managing stuff as the sort of person in the middle. And then it was on your second maternity leave that I went up to be an editor and you became editor-in-chief.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Just to round it off then, Cris Heaton, you came from Shares, didn't you, in 2006, yes?
Yeah, I mean, my background's just as sort of straightforward and simple and logical as everybody else's. So I'd been working in music retail in Canada. And then I came back to the UK and then I worked in kind of financial services consulting with PwC and LCP and people like that. And then I wanted to do something different. And at the time, one of my flatmates was a journalist. So I decided it would be interesting to try my hand at journalism. So I went off, did a short journalism course with the sort of blithe confidence that we all have that one's going to walk out and find it easy to get a job, exactly what you want to do. And I'd always been kind of interested in investing and markets and all the stuff around it. So although this was not my intention when I started studying journalism, by the time I'd sort of come out 3 months later, it seemed pretty obvious to me, okay, let's go off and look in kind of investment area. So I then worked in a bunch of places. I did some stuff for Petroleum Economist and I worked at Platts and I worked at Shares. Those are the ones that spring to mind immediately, and I think there were others as well. And then I think MoneyWeek was looking for somebody else to join the team. And so I, in a similar way to John, got a recruit or an advert or something, I can't even remember now, came into the office, had a chat. And again, I liked the kind of ethos of the magazine and kind of the approach we were taking and everything. Merryn, I think you were already on maternity leave at this point, because from what I can remember, the first time we met wasn't then, it was after I had already been hired, I think.
Oh. Well, I did. I mean, I did make some really, really bad hires, and I think there was a point, John, wasn't there, where you banned me from being involved with the interviews.
To be fair, I think that was Toby, but I did think that was a good decision.
Because
it's possible I might not have been hired if Merryn had actually been there. She might have thought better of it, and I'd never have been involved.
My problem was the other way around. I would hire the first person who came in because I hated interviewing so much, and I figured that you couldn't learn that much from anyone in an interview. And it was always a crapshoot anyway, so I always hired the first person. That's why I wasn't allowed to say anymore.
Well, I can't say I stuck around very long, because I think I did sort of this is 2006, 8 months or so. I think I was there. This is when obviously the commodities boom is going really strongly. The emerging markets boom is going really strongly. The gold boom is going really strongly. At the same time, the housing bubble is really kicking off at this point. And these were the kind of, I think, the big threads of MoneyWeek at the time. We were really excited about EMs and commodities and world growth, and really worried about the financial system and about the housing crisis. But it did not fall apart as quickly as we expected it to. I think by the end of 2006, there were the hints that stuff was starting to unravel a bit, but it was not happening.
Well, that was when you wrote a great story about, it was a cover story. I remember it was a wee guy with a house of cards, and you explained CDO squared and all of that stuff actually really clearly. And they were not easy things to unpack.
No, it was that article and Gillian Tett's analogy about the sausage factory that helped me understand what was going on. That was quite interesting.
That was mine.
I thought you stole it. I thought you stole it from her.
No, I did not. I thought it was
okay, then it was Merryn's sausage factory.
And I used it on the Today program to explain it to the. I can't believe it. All these years you've been attributing that to Gillian.
So on the record now, we are setting the record straight. The sausage factory idea was Merryn's. Let it be written down.
Good to know. See, I mean, despite being there for quite a while, one often misses things.
This podcast has been worth it, just to set that.
Absolutely. Actually, now, before we come on to the changing media landscape, which I think is worth a quick look, let's just blow our own trumpet a wee bit and highlight all the stuff we got right in this rather unusual quarter century. Because, John, when did you start to think, oh my God, this is really quite something? You know, the whole credit crunch, like this is really big, and we were quite right to say debt build-up is a problem.
I mean, I think the confirmation, it was starting to feel more confident about things when we're actually going to go pear-shaped in 2006, particularly late 2006. But 2007 was just fully actual serious things happening. I mean, the Bear Stearns hedge funds went, and everyone was trying to pretend that wasn't going to be a problem, and it was. In 2007, obviously Northern Rock, which no one really ever talks about anymore. I mean, there were people queuing outside of banks in Britain in 2007. The Icelandic meltdown. I mean, remember that? I mean, my local council.
John, shout out to James Ferguson, right?
Oh no, absolutely. I mean, James Ferguson was.
It was March 08, and James Ferguson said, "Do not touch anything Icelandic. In fact, just sell banks generally," which was perfect.
Oh no, but to be fair, James got to the Iceland thing much earlier than that. But even in March 08, if you'd taken his advice to sell, the likes of Lloyd's, HBOS, which was still listed at the time, all of the kind of British banks, then you'd have saved yourself a whole pile of money and got out very near the top. So I do think on the financial crisis and, in the run up to it, we were absolutely spot on. And I think that readers who kind of followed what we were saying would have been very happy about it. And, and a lot of readers did write in to say, thank God I was reading you. Because, again, people were constantly trying to sweep it under the carpet as though nothing was going to happen. And it wasn't going to be a big deal.
They couldn't imagine it. There was no Overton window for them to imagine this kind of thing. But we'd seen the structural problem.
Yeah, definitely. Well, the other one thing I do find interesting about the financial crisis, and this goes back to James Ferguson again. James wrote and had pulled out a whole load of stuff explaining to all of us as well why this was going to be a deflationary crisis, because what happens when your banking system goes bust is you get a deflationary depression. And he was absolutely correct, and he was absolutely correct about the aftermath as well, which I have to say I wasn't. And what kind of gets me is that none of the kind of, famous people or economists who actually did have all this data as well kind of saw it. Didn't see it coming, and then they generally were wrong about the aftermath as well. So that always intrigued me, but I don't know what that's down to.
I just felt reaffirmed in that if we have a different perspective, we'll see things that the mainstream doesn't. And broadly, what we've also seen, which the mainstream has been very slow to cotton on to, is that this entire quarter century, at least from where I'm sitting, is about capitalism not really being allowed to work properly, and about central banks basically arsing around with the world economy and also essentially creating some of the worst wealth inequality problems in history with totally overpriced houses and things, and thus making the general populism, which you called, John, in late 2015, much worse. So another thing we did well, I think, as a brand, is we showed people that actually this post-war consensus is quite shaky. You need to start thinking about what happens if it starts to crack. And broadly, it has started to crack. And largely, I think, because central banks have screwed up capitalism, but also when people get cross and the pie isn't growing, all sorts of unpredictable things can happen. And gold keeps going up because gold is noticing that this is really a deeply unhappy state of affairs, for all that you get amazing liquidity in the short term, right? So this has always struck me as like the main, if somebody said, well, what's the most important thing that happened this past quarter century? I think I'd say that.
Yes.
Well, I think we all expected it to kind of reset after the financial crisis burst, because it was incredibly drawn out, because at this point I wasn't actually doing very much for the magazine at all. I think I was living in Paris at the time, but I'd sort of pop into the office and we'd still be emailing and that kind of thing. And all these events were playing out really slowly, and then it came to head in 2000. Well, autumn of 2008, played out through 2009. At that point, we thought, okay, we're going to get to grips with this. The bad debts we sorted out in the system, but we'll also look at how this has been functioning, what's been going wrong in terms of the bubbles, the monetary policy, which was already visibly too loose, and we'll reset onto a healthier economic basis. And I think I'm right in saying that all of us were pretty confident that this was inevitable and that sanity was going to prevail, and the outcomes were so obvious. And of course it didn't. I don't think any of us, and I don't think anybody at all could have anticipated in 2008, 2009 that you get to a situation where central banks would take interest rates down to essentially zero and hold it there for well over a decade with all the additional quantitative easing, and how that would play out. And that, as you say, Andrew, then fuels a lot of what's happened over the subsequent decade, and the failure to kind of deal with those issues, reset them, identify what's going wrong, just setting the seeds for a subsequent crisis.
No creative destruction, just endless pile-ups of, it's rather like a volcano just puking out all this lava, and then you have a hideous new structure.
Exactly, which brings us into exactly what you're saying about, John, yes, you and Merryn, I think, both very correctly recognised in the middle of the following decade the growing role of politics and populism here, and how the sort of political forces were going to be increasingly important in shaping markets, in shaping the economy, and shaping kind of investment destinations, really. I mean, what made you actually conclude that? Because it was very visible when, if you were involved with MoneyWeek, you could see the sort of tracking within MoneyWeek to becoming a bit more concerned about politics than it would ever have been 10 years previously. Was there a sort of light bulb moment where both of you just went, this is going to happen, or was it progressive?
I can't really answer that. It must have been progressive. I mean, I suppose one of the things that happens when you do something like MoneyWeek is that you read so much more than other people do. You read so much from so many different sources. You have so much information coming in that possibly your subconscious works harder than other people's to filter that information, and you come out with maybe a more accurate sense of how the world looks. So partially that, but I suppose the other thing that I would say that both John and I probably thought about quantitative easing in particular is that it effectively made monetary policy into fiscal policy, and that could only end very badly because it was such an enormous challenge to what I suppose we would previously have thought of as democratic norms, that only a democratically elected fiscal authority can manage the redistribution of wealth. And to find ourselves in a fairly long-term situation where the distribution of wealth became something managed by a non-elected, supposedly independent monetary authority was, for me anyway, the first sort of real challenge to the idea that the post-war democratic capitalist consensus could hold. Is that fair, John?
Absolutely. I think that there was a logic to the idea that by suppressing so much stuff, by just trying to print money to basically keep the system ticking along as it had been before it blew up, was going to produce some kind of counter reaction of some sort. But also the sheer scale of the debt that we had as a result of those decisions meant that governments were inevitably going to have to get more involved in the distribution And you could see, because the funny thing is, I remember very specifically that before the financial crisis, one of the things that people moaned about with politics was that all politicians were the same, and there was basically no real gap between the Labour Party and the Conservative Party in terms of their policies. Now, whether that was true or not was kind of different, but ideologically, everybody agreed on the same thing. And you could see also that ideology was starting to fall apart. I mean, Ed Miliband took Labour to the left even before, Jeremy Corbyn was anywhere near on the scene. And you could see that there was that splintering and there was that frustration there. But yeah, I think overall it was more just a general sense that had to be some sort of reaction because we weren't getting anything fixed on the financial side. And the house price
and
stuff.
I do think
yeah.
Sorry, John.
Well, no, it's like, the house price stuff was clearly a massive issue. And that, and there was a lot of, I mean, remember the Eurozone financial crisis was happening as well. So you had the Eurozone kind of tearing itself apart over Greece. And again, that was very political because the Greeks basically had a depression forced on them. Okay, you could say they voted for it, but it was a choice between that and getting kicked out of seeing their currency go to zero. So I think there was a lot of politics on our doorstep as well all through that period.
Now, this is a point at which I feel somewhat jealous of all three of you and your stints in charge of editing the magazine, because each of you managed to coincide nicely with a really kind of good, clean crisis where stuff is happening all the time and it's really exciting. And then, so John has edited in basically the early part of the 2010s. And then I think in about 2016, you were a bit tired of doing the magazine on a weekly basis, and so from about late 2016 to about mid 2018, I kind of helped out a lot, helping manage the editing in the background. And in contrast to the times when you guys were editing, where there was you were peaking of the .com bubble, you had, or the trailing off of the .com bubble, you had the financial crisis, Euros and debt crisis.
We did.
Exactly. You were just after it, yeah. All these things, that kind of 2016-ish era, to my mind, is an important linchpin because you have all these kind of major political shifts. You've got Brexit, you've got Trump being elected, you've got other stuff that we might not think about so much, but Macron, for example, coming to power in France. We've got Xi in China, has been in for 4 years and is starting to consolidate power and put together the sort of political direction of China that we've seen subsequently, things like this. So there's a lot of shifts that tell us how much more important politics is becoming, but there isn't the crisis, there isn't the big event, there's just an evolution. But I look back and I think that time is a really key linchpin in driving the era that we have today.
Andrew, I think you should let Cris edit for a couple of years so he can have his
Okay,
own
well,
crisis.
I'm sure one will be, crises are like London buses.
It's going to be good.
Okay, we've got a few minutes left.
But now we need to hand over to Andrew as editor, actually, because 2018, I've decided I've had enough of running things, and Andrew has sort of stepped and said,
then I got the pandemic, which was perfect.
So you take it on.
Exactly. Okay, we've got about 5 minutes left, and I think one thing worth exploring quickly is something you alluded to at the beginning, Merryn, like how would one, if one would, set up MoneyWeek today in such a fractured media landscape? Would one? And I mean, it's not that the magazine can't keep going, because premium magazines can always be the center of any proposition, really, presumably omni-channel. But Cris and I have noticed, like, digesting stuff is much harder than it was, because half the American financial press disappeared in 2009. Remember Smart Money, Worth, was it called?
Yes, all those magazines.
Business Week. I mean, we can't do our normal read now. Barron's is okay-ish.
I love that Business Week still exists. It's under the Bloomberg brand.
But it's gone to a monthly rather than a weekly. The title's now totally wrong. It should be rebranded. False advertising. Sorry, I know you guys are Bloomberg. You're on point here, but nonetheless, that has to be on the record. It's no longer a week.
Okay, all right. I'll tell you what, Andrew. I think that right now magazines are a bit like copper mines, right? Incredibly valuable, but it's a lot more expensive to build a new one than to buy an existing one, right? So the magazine is a premium product. It's extremely valuable. It's got great, loyal, solid readers. We still love those readers. It's got a brilliant circulation. You do a fabulous job editing it. It is absolute jewel in any organization's crown. But if you were to go and try and build it now, it would be so expensive. So expensive. Not just, I mean, I don't just mean, building journalists and all that. I just mean that the competition in this space is completely different, as you say, so fractured, from Substack through to the really good websites, not just here, but in the US and all over. And there's a lot, as I said earlier, the quality has changed. We used to be in the first 10, 15 years, and still I think, Andrew, what you produce is a quality above almost everything else, except for, of course, what John and I produce elsewhere. It is superb, but the quality of other personal finance and investing journalism has massively improved. So when we launched this into a quality vacuum, and I don't think that vacuum.
No, it's not with decent Substacks. It's just so interesting how much more fractured, both for investors really, and for journalists. I go to Twitter, which is a cesspit in some ways, but fascinating material is on Twitter, and you have to take a look. Then I have to go to Substacks. Then I have to go here. So funnily enough, actually, there's just as much, I've got to look at this, and I've got to look at that, but it's in a different way now.
Yeah, and people won't take obviously the readers that we still have, you still have, do. But people are paying for Substacks, they're paying for this, they're paying for that. And also, interestingly, people do now, I talked in the beginning about how people do not have their own financial opinions and therefore need to be told. But actually, now that money and politics are so bound up, and finance and politics is so bound up in a way that they weren't then, people do have default financial views. So that's also a massive change.
That is a change. That's a change. Okay, I think we better leave it there because...
And speaking of that, John has just changed. Very futuristic.
Have you been shut out? I'm about to get shut out of this booth, I think, as well. So we'd better leave it there. But I should just say thank you so much. It's actually nice to have all four of us together, which is very rare. So let's do this over cocktails one day too. And I should remind listeners while we're all still here that if you don't already subscribe, you can try 6 issues of the magazine for free at moneyweek.com/subscription. So I would like to thank you all very, very much for your time, and I will see you soon. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers. Thank you.